Next, I'd like to turn to Nick Santo. We had a modeler send me an email saying, could you have somebody on the show showing us how to solder feeder wires to track? We're having trouble doing it, and we really appreciate somebody showing us how to do that. Well, Nick then heard about, I announced it on one of the shows about a month ago, and Nick sent me an email and said, I'd love to be able to do that. And so here is Nick Santo with how to solder feeder wires to your track. Nick, welcome.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate. This is the general setup that I use to solder with. The solder 6040. I like Chip Quick as a solder paste. I just took a piece of 14 gauge wire, and I use just Klein clippers. They're good all the way up to 10 gauge for size, and all the way down to 38 gauge magnet wire. I find they're very good to strip the insulation from solder with.
What scale are you working in, Nick?
I work with HO scale. This should work with pretty much any scale. Sorry, this are you getting a good picture or a terrible picture?
No, I've been getting a good picture.
Okay, good. What I've done is I've stripped a couple sides, or just cut the insulation on a couple sides, taken a knife and stripped the wire, and that'll leave me a nice clean piece of wire to work with. Clean wire inside an insulated shell is usually, you can count on that. The next thing I'm going to do is I'll stabilize it with a pair of tweezers. And right here, what I'm doing is I'm going to strip the wire. This is Telco wire, which is 24, 26 gauge. Nothing special. If you've got an old piece of Cat 5 cable, that works as well. After it's stripped, I'll wrap it around the feeder wire, which would go all the way under the layout. And then the next thing I'll do is just wrap it tightly. You can see there, it's just finger work. You can use a pair of needle nose pliers on that if you want. There's a nice wrap there. The next thing I'll do is add a little bit of flux. Again, I like Chip Quick. It works really well for an awful lot of stuff, and it stays where it's supposed to be. That's on the end of I think that's probably 10 thousandths piano wire and just a pin vise. You don't need very much flux. And then with the Weller iron, not an awful lot of heat either. This will probably push the Weller to about all it's worth. It's not set all the way up at full bore. It's cut back to about 4 on a scale of 5, so about 80% power. It's a 40-watt iron. And what I'm looking for is a nice, smooth, clean silver joint there. Feed in enough solder to really hold it. The joint will stay. And what I'll do is I'll just test, warm it up again, make sure it's all nice and bright, shiny silver. If it's gray, it's a cold joint and it won't work very well. You can see I'm holding the wire as was. These are 18 gauge stranded wires that I've done the same thing to. Just cut a piece of the insulation off the feeder wire, wrapped it, and then taken the Telco wire and wrapped it around the 18 gauge and soldered it exactly the same way. And that goes up into the layout. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take and clean off a little bit of, this is micro engineering rail, and it has a weathering coating on it. On this particular pass, I'm going to take and just clean that off a little bit, add a little bit of flux again, and then warm it up and put a little bit of solder on. A little bit of solder between the soldering iron and the piece of track allows the heat to move from the soldering iron into the track so that you can make the joint. Just needs a little bit of a puddle there. That's all you really need. And that's a good start. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tin or put a little bit of solder on the telco wire. This is a little bit sloppy. I usually will bend it to shape before I put the flux on and go after it with a solder. But for demonstration, this will be just fine. What I'm going to do now is I've got solder on the rail and solder on the piece of wire. A little bit more of a bend to what I want. And then also I've got to do is reflow the solder so that it makes a nice joint between the two pieces of metal. You can see the rail jointers are pretty close. The plastic ties are pretty close there. If you don't stick around too long and you don't have too hot an iron, that's a perfectly fine way to do business. If you have a hotter iron or you're going to have to stay around longer, then to move those back, and actually I've seen some people take a pair of tweezers or hemostats or something that's not going to damage the rail and use it as a heat sink on either side and spread those ties a little bit farther apart or cut a few more ties off so there's some distance there. If it was a rail joiner in there, I'd be doing the same thing. Same as last time, a little bit of flux. Warm up that spot so that you just have a little bit of solder that's going to stay there. That's the piece of wire I used on the bottom. I just pulled it off so it's all tinned and ready to go. A lot of times I'll flatten it out so that it goes right into the web there. And then I go right vertical down into the layout. I can either do it that way or drop the wire down through and bend it so that all I'm doing at this point is just reflowing the solder, and that can be in place. And that's all there is to that. Push the ties back up to the joint and pretty much disappear the joint. The other thing I do is I'll put that joint away from the aisle. It'll be back toward the back wall where I won't see it. I might clean off the top of the rail there just a little bit. Alcohol and a Q-tip will take care of the rest of that flux. And there you have a finished joint. That's all ready to go. And again, if I happen to do that on a rail joiner, the same thing. That's all there is to that. Are there any questions? Any thoughts? Somebody going to tell me I'm absolutely crazy to be soldering that close to plastic ties with a soldering iron?
You might comment on the cleaner that you use for your tip.
Yes, actually, I use brass wool, and I used to use water on a sponge, and I've gotten away from that. The brass wool leaves just a little bit of solder on the soldering iron, and actually, when I finish with that, when I'm finished with the iron, I'll take and I'll just put a little bit of solder on the iron, and that seems to make the tips last a lot longer. The oxidation of the copper or iron or whatever in the tip doesn't happen. It gives me better tip life.
So Nick, I gather you're not a fan of using connectors to the main bus.
I'm sorry, one more time again, Ken?
I gather you're not a fan of using like those connectors, the plastic cases and stuff.
Suitcase connectors.
I know how to solder and I'm cheap. And when it comes time to say, whoops, I've swapped the wires, what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll just put the soldering iron on that joint and pull the telco wire, and it comes off like that. So, it separates very easily too.
Hey, Nick.
So to be honest with you, I haven't used any connectors. Sorry, Ed, go ahead.
Well, what I've done with the plastic track and all that, I actually take 2 pieces of paper towel and put them in water and then put them next to where the joint is. So things wind up being, the heat winds up going into the wetted paper towels. So it's one of those things of if the water starts boiling away, it's a good sign to stop soldering.
Yeah, I like that idea. And some people, I've seen some people, I guess they call them bowl clamps. They're black and they have clips on them for paper, and put a clamp on on all 4 sides. Anything to take that heat away. If you've got a stronger iron than that. I used to use a Weller gun, and boy, I did everything I could and have a distance between the plastic ties, and I'd still melt a tie every once in a while. So when I backed off on the heat a little bit, I saved a few more ties.
Well, Nick, I appreciate so much you doing this for us tonight. Thank you.
Well, thanks for asking, Jim.
No question.